Yet of my song. So welcome everyone to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. I'm Pastor Megan Rohrer and I'm in San Francisco. And this way is Pastor Amanda Zentz, who is currently in Washington and in the process of becoming someone who is in Oregon soon. Right? Okay.
Correct.
I have spent most of my day at the celebration in San Francisco for the Supreme Court rulings about Prop 8 and DOMA, the Domestic Marriage Act. Hopefully, when you're watching this, justice has advanced so far you have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. It's the rulings about same-sex marriage that make it possible for people in California, perhaps sometime in July of 2013, to start getting married again. About 18,000 people got married, and then their weddings were put in question when a group of people voted no on their weddings. And so I was out with a bunch of clergy today. We try to show up whenever possible. Since 2008, so for about the last 5 years, we've been working with these rulings, and I've been with a group of pastors who have gotten arrested during most of the times that the courts have made decisions. Not because we thought it would change the law, but because there are so many people who have such angry, loud voices that tell people that being gay is not okay, that we have to do something extraordinary to be able to let people know that there are religious voices also able to everyone know that there's nothing that you can do, neither death nor life, nor principalities, nor things present, nor anything in the Galatians reading for this week that could ever separate you from the love of God. And particularly as Lutherans, we take this to an even higher degree, believing that there's nothing that you can do to earn it. You get your kind of fantasticness through baptism. You can't screw it up for the rest of your life. And I don't care what question you ask me about what horrible thing someone has done. Lutherans believe you can't screw it up. You get to go to heaven, not pass. Grandma likes so that's kind of part of what Lutherans believe. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we're looking at some of the text, the civilian text today, which is why I'm talking super fast. I thought you might like my t-shirt. I left it on from the protest rally. I got it from a Lutheran in Canada. To hate the queer community. We use that kind of language out here on the West Coast. If it offends you, translate it to whatever thing that sounds better to you. Got my Rainbow Pride socks on from when I visited the folk in Portland, where Amanda will be traveling to. I went to Portland Pride when we visited them to talk about how when congregations aren't loving and supportive of their gay people, that they very often run away and move to San Francisco, and then they become a part of my congregation, the homeless folk in San Francisco that we take care of. Study came out this week. 30% of the homeless folk in San Francisco identify as bisexual. And that means that until you, the rest of the country, wherever it is that you live, are nicer to your gay and lesbian people, you teach them that God does in fact love them the ways that Lutheran believe is true, they will continue to live here on the streets and face the kind of injustice that happens to people who are homeless, rather than live in intolerant communities. I also have a bit of a lost voice because yesterday I led a bullhorn tour of Methodist youth. We took a tour of the Tenderloin, learned about the radical pastors in the 60s, and then went and fed some people who are HIV positive. So, I say all that not to toot my own horn, but to say the text for today, if you space out at any point, the point is nothing to do that will make God not love you. And instead of spending all your time worrying about whether or not you get to go to heaven and you're saved, go feed somebody. It can do community. Yeah.
So you are cutting in and out a little bit here and there. Our connection might not be great, so we'll probably try to watch that over talking again today, kind of like we did the last time. So I'll chime in on the side on occasion, and then wait, and we'll pass off, because I think the connection is being a little choppy chop.
Okay. And if you want to go on mute for a little bit, I'm going to talk a lot about slavery, and then I'll kick it back over to you. So, it's a really fun topic, slavery. Woohoo, right? But a lot of the texts that are happening, you'll notice on the left-hand side where it says text for the week, those are all of the possible choices that your congregation could use. And they have lots of different choices depending upon which text your pastor chooses will shape the way you hear the Bible on Sunday in church. We'll talk about as many as possible, though we'll skip the ones that we know less about or we don't like as much. Sorry about that. But there's a couple things that kind of underlie a lot of the readings that come at this time when the people picked this 3-year cycle that we call the lectionary, the Sunday readings. They try to put things together that are kind of thematic. It's possible that a pastor will skip the topic of slavery altogether, but if they do that, they'll miss the through line that's in almost all of the scriptural passages that are happening today. There's a couple of stories in the Old Testament that you need to know about that will be referenced in some of the other texts. There's the story of Moses. Moses is the dude who, if you know the story of the baby who gets put in the wicker basket because everyone's going to die, he grows up and it becomes a part of the priesthood, or not the priesthood, the kinghood, the pharaoh. He's like the pharaoh's buddy, the son. And what happens is that the pharaoh is bad, and God, the God of the Israelites, tries to show that the God of Israelites is more powerful than the God of the Egyptians. Where if you've ever gone to like a museum of modern science, the idea is that we all kind of come from Africa, out of the people who kind of evolved through the world. Yes, evolution, we believe in it. Go Lutherans. We all kind of come out of Africa. The very first humans that are thought to have, I guess, crawled in their ape-like way around the world kind of came from around the Nile and came around the Egyptian region. And so we have stories that kind of come out of this intermingling of these different cultures of people. And so this is one of those stories. And a lot of the stories in the Hebrew Bible, which is a way of saying the Old Testament, but not saying it in a way that implies that Jewish people are old school or that we have something new or better to teach. So in the Hebrew scriptures, the language that they're written in, there's a lot of stories that are simply the way that an oppressed people tries to explain the fact that they get captured a lot. They get put in prison a lot, they get killed a lot, and they're trying to have a story that shows that God, their God in particular, still loves them and is with them throughout the story. If you're someone who's gone through difficult times, if you've gone through divorce or custody battles, or you've not had enough food, or things have been tight, or you've actually lived through war, or any sort of trauma that unfortunately is more and more common these days, these stories can kind of speak to you when you're in a place of feeling like the world's not fair. Well, what they did as a culture is they retold the stories about God. When the old stories didn't work anymore because God couldn't be seen as someone who was fair or just or on your side, you retold the story. You didn't throw God out with the bathwater or say, oh, that doesn't make sense, I Googled that, and, dinosaurs, right? They didn't need things to be factually accurate. They just thought if the story didn't make sense in the world around them, it just meant you needed to tell another story. And so this is one of those stories that tries to explain how they can be in kind of a tough jam, a Scooby-Doo tough jam before they figure out who the culprit is, and still have God be on their side even if they're not winning in this current moment. And so the plagues that God gives the Pharaoh, the 12 plagues, are actually quite funny. If you know anything about old-timey times, because several of them are STDs, boils and plagues and bumps and lumps. Um, some of them are just bugs that kill all of your food, right? So getting rid of people through starvation. Some of them are just really annoying and disgusting, like gross, there's frogs everywhere. Um, and so the plagues happen. Moses tries to escape. Imagine Charlton Heston parting the Red Sea, right? It might be the only part that you remember from that. Parting the Red Sea. There's this pillar of cloud and a pillar of smoke. You'll see references to that in the Psalms for this reading. Pillars of clouds and pillars of smoke often accompany sightings of God, particularly in the Hebrew Bible. And this is something that's repeated. The story of Elijah and Elisha also has them parting the sea to get away and to have God save the Israelites. It's when something happens to Moses, because Moses is established to be really faithful, you can have that same thing happen to other characters. And it's just like saying, see, they're a real prophet, like Moses, because they could do that too. We have no idea if they really could do that same thing too. We don't have any pictures or Polaroids of it. We don't know. Maybe they did part seas. Maybe they went through at a time when they knew that the tide was low. We don't know. But it's essentially a part of the story that lets you know that God is there and that something bad is happening. But this escape across the sea not only gets them away from the Egyptians and shows you that the God of the Israelites is more powerful than the God of the Egyptians, but it frees them from slavery. Now, if you've read any farther in the book of Exodus, where they wander for 40 years and God is promising them the land of milk and honey, there's a lot of great hymns and gospel songs that talk about getting that milk and honey. They never get there. They never find the land that is their own. If you've read a newspaper, you know Israel is still an unsafe place. There's lots of discord that's happening. So they don't ever reach that eventuality of justice that they're looking for. They don't ever reach a time where they're happy with God, which is an interesting thing. They grumble the entire time they're in the desert, and they're mad about everything. God gives them free food. They're mad they have to get it themselves, right? And that it's boring and they have to eat it every day, right? So everything that happens, they're frustrated with God, even though they're kind of giving this big gift. But for decades and decades and centuries and, a long time, however long it was, later, people will still say, remember what I did for you in the desert and I gave you the food, right? That's the way to say, I give you everything. I give you life, I give you food, I give you protection. I am your God, and I will bring you justice. I will free you from slavery. So this is like this big promise that carries forward. There's also the story of Lot. Lot is the dude that often is talked about with the pastors who are super angry and mad about gay people, but they skip through the crap parts of the Lot story and they just go to the end and they're like, homosexuality is bad and Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So what happens first in that story has to do with slavery. Okay, so there's lots of types of slavery. If you click on the link on the bottom right-hand side, where it says slavery in the Bible, there's a deeper description of the types of slavery that I'll tell you about. One of them will come back to you for this story of Lot. So there is this idea of enslavement, that you can kind of like capture people, that you can capture wives, that you can conquer people and take them. Early in like Deuteronomy, which are the dudes who come up with a whole bunch of laws that you have to follow. They're the like math counter guys. They're trying to like make sure everything's fair based on math. They create rules that makes the slave trade acceptable. It's particularly about people who are not Israelites. So it's Israelites owning people who are of a different race and culture of them. But they had rules about how long you could have a slave, vary between 6 and 7 years. There was another kind of slavery that involved debt. So if you went through a court system and you didn't have enough money because of a famine, you could work off your debt to other people through the court system. However, there's something called Jubilee, and Jubilee is this time after either 49 years or 50 years, it depends on who you talk to, they kind of argue about it, where it's considered that all of your debts are paid in full, and so you are freed from slavery. There's also another type of slavery that's more of a sexual slavery or a conjugal slavery, and that comes from the idea, the very old ancient marriage idea, that fathers own their daughters, and fathers can bequeath their daughters to other people sexually with the understanding that that person will eventually marry them, or that their son will marry them and they'll be protected. Now, the understanding that comes around this has less to do with like the dowry stuff that you might hear about. That kind of would be a more well-to-do family. You wouldn't normally give your daughter away to sexual slavery if there was like a dowry exchange or you were in the upper class. But you can give your daughter away to be like a fifth wife. But the rules are that you have to take care of that daughter forever. And you have to give them the same hospitality you would of your own daughter when she was living with you. So you have to feed them, you have to clothe them, you have to provide them with shelter, and you have to provide them with safety. If you fail to provide them with food, water, shelter, or safety, the contract is ended and that slave is free. So we'll come back to this particular type of slavery when we talk about black. This also, in Greek society, which was the society that was kind of around in Jesus' time, there was an idea that people had classes, right? And so there was the man who was the property owner, and then there was the wife, who may or may not have chosen to be the wife in that culture, and then there were male slaves, and then there were female slaves, and anyone who was below you in that hierarchy, you could legally be intimate with sexually, as long as it was done within your power structure. So whoever's on the top of the power structure is up the top sexually. You can figure that out yourselves. But you can't go up in the ranking system, and that's when you would get in trouble. So fornication would be having sex outside of these ranks, or having sex in different positions, or having sex with someone else's wife who wasn't in your chain of command. So sexual misconduct had everything to do with who owned who, and slavery contracts. So that's a piece to remember as you're reading through these texts and when you're thinking about Paul. And then I think there was another kind of slavery. Oh, there was another part about slavery that I wanted to let you know, and that's just the idea, again, like I said, that slaves who are Israelites have the ability to be free. There's not a system where you are a slave forever if you are of the same race and cultural class. The idea of permanent slavery was not something that was part of the Israeli or the Hebrew culture. It was something that came from the Mesopotamians, the people who were conquering the Jews, and part of how they would make that sign is they would like pierce your ear by like sticking a nail through a door. And basically they would subjugate you because your ear was a symbol of your obedience to people. And so if you think about biblical conversations about slavery in the Old Testament, there are some texts that used to be used by people who didn't agree that God loves everyone equally and that we're all made equal, kind of through the cross in this beautiful Lutheran way. And at the time, in particular in American culture, they believed the text that said that slaves should be obedient to their masters. That completely does not work within a biblical construct. There's not a construct in the Bible of people who are slaves forever. There are people who are taken in war, but they're treated more like wives. than like the kinds of slaves that you would think about in the South. But we have this tendency to take texts about a topic and just relate them to whatever we think about it today, right? So we have a tendency to take these really concrete ideas about sexuality that only work within a particular way of framing leadership within a household and applying those ideas about sexuality to all of humanity, right? Or taking these ideas about slavery that were about certain time periods. I mean, how many people have felt like they were slaves to their jobs, or that like an internship was slavery? It's not the same in any way, shape, or form, but it's more like that in that it's time limited. Or sending someone to prison for 7 years. They didn't have prison industrial complexes back then. They killed you, they stoned you, or they made you work off your debt, right? The prisons were very different back then. You were kind of just being held until they could torture you and do bad things to you physically. It wasn't about keeping you with a life sentence in jail like we might have at the prison down the street. Very different cultural constructs. So let's get back to the story of Lot. And the funny thing is, I've been talking for a very long time, and we're not even to the actual text we're talking about today. If you don't understand these stories, you can't understand the texts that are going to happen. So maybe, pastors, you could require everyone to watch this Bible study before you preach a sermon, and then you can preach on whatever it is that you want to talk about, and have this all be there. Okay, so Lot. Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah, there are these two angels, or strangers. We're not sure if they're angels in the like fluttery wing. They're certainly not cherubims, the little baby angels you'd see in Italy. They're like They're dude angels, or strangers. Maybe they're from a different race or class. We don't know what it means. The word either means alien, like an illegal immigrant, or angel, like messenger of God. These two people come to town in a culture where the most important thing you can do in order to be faithful, in order to be a part of the community, is to be hospitable. It's more important for you to let a stranger come and stay in your house and be safe than to keep your own family safe, right? I don't even think we have brains that can understand this, because we would never, ever, 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 ever do that, right? But in this culture, it was more important for the stranger to be safe in your home than for your own wife or children or anyone in that list below you to be safe. So what happens in Lot's story is this community who is interested in, I would say, taking these two aliens into this kind of sexual slavery that we were talking about. But instead of being bequeathed like a daughter to a family where they have to take care of your safety and give you food and shelter and protection, they wanted to take you into sexual slavery as a way to defile you, to ridicule you, and to shame you for being of a different culture or class. Right? So it was about intimidating and humiliating these guests who were going to stay in Lot's house. So what Lot says, that the angry, pious, pastorly folk who have lied to people and told them being gay causes a hurricane, have ignored, Lot says to them, don't defile sexually these strangers who have come to my house. Here, have my daughters, and do with them what you will. Right? So he trades them and tries to have proper exchange of sexual slaves with this community. Right? So he's trying to follow the slavery rules the way that they're set up in the Deuteronomic codes. Not cool, Lot, right? You can't treat ladies this way. We know a thing or two about feminism. Bad choice, right? The lady in Texas who just stood up for 11 hours to prevent like abortion rights from going through, she would have filibustered this decision, Lot. Not cool, right? So this isn't a moment where it's like Sodom and Gomorrah is a really awesome place. It's a comment about sexual slavery that even if God like doesn't destroy this town, because they do actually defile and kind of like ravage each other. They become blind in some stories. the story goes different. There's 3 different versions of it, whether you're hearing the retelling, like in Proverbs, I think is one of them, or in Judges. There's about 3 different stories of the Sodom and Gomorrah stories, and it goes very differently. Some of them, I think the people are like struck blind, and some they like actually do take the daughters. It's goofy, and not everyone agrees what actually happens to Lot. But what happens is the next morning, Lot flees, and he tries to take his family with him, but his wife turns back and looks at the city. Now, if in fact this community just took their daughters as sexual slaves, wouldn't any mother look back to see their children for one last time? But this becomes a bigger story that's not, I think, supposed to be about what's actually happening. It's supposed to be a story that is teaching people how to survive Holocaust, how to survive capture, and how to look towards the future for justice when everything behind you is crap, when everything is unjust behind you. And it's something that is repeated in the gospel text when they're talking about the temple being destroyed and people being ravaged. They're trying to say, get out of your house quickly during this disaster where people are trying to slaughter you, because if you take the time to look back, they will kill you too. So this is part how to survive an apocalypse, part really, 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 really bad justice from God, right? Because it's bad feminism, sexual slavery, not cool anymore. But it was an attempt mathematically to make better decisions in a really rough and tumbly time when slavery and sexual abuse was happening, and they didn't have the same court system that we do, and so they were trying to make the best of it that they could and have some power over it, and at least know it was going to end sometime, whether it was going to be in 49 or 50 years or it was going to be in 6 or 7 years.